Hello again, and we're here today with Brooks Gibbs. Brooks, so glad to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of start off with asking you a little bit about you. Our listeners, as they listen to this podcast, I'm a firm believer that people connect with people.
Absolutely agree with that.
So let's kind of share with us a little bit about you as a person, as an individual, and kind of what...
Oh, great.
Got to in our conversation
so I was
today.
born at an early age.
Oh, no. We'll be here all day.
I appreciate you asking that because your background really does establish, who you are and what you were here for. And I've just had a great life and lots of experiences in many ways. I've done things where I've built radio and TV stations literally all over the world. I also have built multiple homes. My life has really been centered around creating things. I love doing things, and whenever I do it, I tend to do it on a big scale.
Awesome.
And so that's kind of what my whole path has sort of led me to this that we're going to be talking about today as far as accessory dwelling units.
Awesome. Well, our conversation today, and the reason why I reached out and wanted to invite you to be on the show is, as you know, our audience are someone that we call a charitable boomer, those that are approaching or into retirement and want to do it the best way, the brightest way. And so through our conversations and our interaction, what I actually hear about what you're doing is allowing and giving an opportunity for these baby boomers to leverage an asset, which is their home.
Yes.
To be able to create some flexibility in their retirement that we typically don't see. Most retirees have two major assets, which are your home, which is the equity in your home, and then a 401k or retirement balances. So this is a way that I see that our listeners can start to understand how do you open up the value inside of your real estate to create a flexible asset to use in more ways than you might think, which is why I'm really excited about this conversation. So what is this concept called an accessory dwelling unit, and why does it relate here?
Great. I appreciate you asking that. Accessory dwelling unit is really the term that cities and states have given to a second living space on your existing property. Now, in the past, you've probably heard it called a lockout apartment or a basement apartment, or maybe it's an apartment that's over the garage. You've heard the term granny flat or mother-in-law apartment. Sometimes on larger homes, you'll hear about gatehouse or carriage house. It's a second living space that is auxiliary to the primary space. In other words, you have your home, which is anywhere from 1,800 to 5,000 square feet. And then there's another living space that is a complete independent living space with a kitchen, bathroom, and everything that's usually anywhere from 25 to 30% the size of your main living house. And it's now available to be rented out as an income property. And what's changed here in the States is that, or in the state of Utah especially, is that cities are now basically allowing that and actually encouraging that to happen, which they have not been doing for the past 50 to 60 years.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, if you think about sort of the history of what's going on, you look back 100 years ago, land was readily available everywhere. And after World War II, basically we started to create these suburbias, which were concentrations where people came to live and work. And we started creating those concentrated areas. If you look at our Wasatch Front, that is concentrated up and down the Wasatch Front along the corridor of I-15, ranging from about Spanish Fork on up to Ogden. And it's basically one big city. And that's where the central population is. And 50 years ago, we had lots of land to build out housing. And today we don't. All of that concentrated area that's within a 50-mile radius of there is basically been filled in. And so we are now facing a very large housing crisis. 50 years ago, the goal of the family was to have this suburban, was to have a nice home with a big lot and a garden and maybe a chicken coop and things in the back. So most of the lots were a size of a quarter acre or larger. Now lots are much smaller and the homes are going on there. But the cities are recognizing, wow, we don't want to just convert our nice cities into just high-rise apartments. So they're looking for alternative housing options and creating an ADU or a second living space on your existing property is a prime way to do that.
Wow. So Let me kind of simplify what you just said, what I hear.
Sure.
That might be going on in the mind of our listeners, which is now knowing that one of their primary assets is their home.
Yes.
Some of these baby boomers, they lived in their home, they raised their families there. They're almost, or they are empty nesters. They have this 1/4 acre lot, which is a beautiful home, but they have a big backyard.
Yeah.
A lot of those folks are thinking, do I want to be here for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And when I sell, do I upgrade? Do I downgrade? What you're talking about is maintaining at your residence,
Yes.
that you've lived in for 20 to 30 years, where you're comfortable with, that
Yes.
you know your neighbors, you know your community, and somehow creating that environment to be more flexible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What does that look like?
Maybe what I could do is share what my experience was, because I am right in the category that you're talking about. Being 60 years old, I've gone through many transitions, and one of the biggest and toughest transitions was in 2008 when the economy went down, and I watched my 401k and the business I was building at that time basically go out of business.
Wow.
And I had to basically do the restart. And so I restarted by getting a career and finding a great job. I was working for a company, started rebuilding up my retirement account. But in those 8 or 9 years, I couldn't recoup what I had. And then at the age of 58, I got laid off, which was like, oh, now what do I do? Because 58, I'm really looking at, I got to try and start a new career at 58 and compete in a real tough marketplace. And I realized I did not have a retirement plan that was going to work for me in the long run. And I needed to find something that would passively give me an income that I didn't have to work 60 hours a week to make happen. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at what's the biggest asset that I have in my life. And it was our property and our home. And I said, how can I use that to help generate an income? So I went down to my local city. I happen to live in the city of Bountiful. And I said, what's the city's stance on my creating like a basement apartment in my home? And I knew in the past that they really did not like that. They don't want it. And they would basically say, no, you cannot do that. I was surprised when the city planner said, oh, we just passed an ordinance for the city called an accessory dwelling unit ordinance that now allows you to create a second living space on your property and rent it out. I went, wow, now that's cool.
Great timing.
So I started looking into it to figure out what that would be. And what I recognized is that in the city of Bountiful, a single bedroom apartment of about 500 to 600 square feet rents for $1,000 a month. And I thought $1,000 a month is a pretty good retirement.
Yeah.
Especially for space in a house that I don't really use or need. And so I started at that point planning how I would make this happen. And what I've finally come to after about 6 months of looking into that, I finally decided rather than having someone live in my basement, I had an old single car garage that was built 80 years ago that was falling down. And I said, if I tear that down and put a new garage in with an apartment above it, I would have a rentable income, but I wouldn't have somebody live in my basement. I still have my privacy. And so that's where we're going now. And because of the size of that, I'm actually getting about $1,300 a month out of that right now.
Wow. So in the past, they kind of frowned on even a basement being finished and rented out consistently.
Yes. There are a lot of basement apartments in cities that are basically renting out of their basement, but they're doing it, quote unquote, illegally. Mm-hmm. They really don't have a legal right to do so. And should the city decide to enforce that, they literally could come in and stop them that and fine them for that, because their city ordinances, regulations would not allow that in the past.
Oh, okay. But this accessory dwelling unit ordinance that was passed expanded that to not only a basement apartment with a separate living space, but also a separate outbuilding.
That is correct.
On a property.
So an ADU can be considered an apartment accessory dwelling, which is a part of your existing house. Okay, it's in your primary dwelling. It can be an attachment, which might be an addition to the house. It could be detached, which is a complete separate building that's a part of your house. And it could be, like the garage might be detached with it sitting above. So you got a lot of options as to how you do that.
So for our listeners that are thinking, Absolutely. I have a home and I'm flexible to consider how to use that into retirement. Where do they start? Where do they start? I think as anyone approaches retirement and starts to consider how to start planning for income and what my expenses are, it's kind of daunting to know where to go to get some information.
Right. Well, where you start, realizing that building the building is not your end result. You really start with someone like you. It's like, what is my goal and what's my plan, and what's my plan over the long run? Because this is not something that you're just buying a car and then going to, turn it back in. You're really going to build and create something that you're going to live with for many years, probably 10, 15, 20, could be 30 years or more. Mm-hmm. And it also is something that probably could have a great possibility of being turned over to your family after you've gone. Mm-hmm. And so you want to really kind of look at how this would be utilized over those years and create a plan and then design towards that. And that's a lot of what I try to do to help people understand how you use this tool to help you accomplish what you want to do. Because it's much more than just financial income.
Correct. And that's where I'm glad that you're going there, Brooks, because what I really feel like is valuable is understanding how to use your home as a goal-driven tool.
Yes.
Driving towards what your goals or special circumstances might be. Because as we know, as we move into retirement, all of us are very different, right? We have different family circumstances, different financial situations, different expense needs that want to be met, different health concerns. And so the reason why I love this conversation and leveraging some of our real estate to help us move through and into retirement is there's a lot of different ways you can use an accessory dwelling unit. And so you've shared with me previous to this recording a few of those. I would love for you to share us a few stories on, a couple different ways on how to use that.
Sure. So I'm going to tell you a story that actually happened. It was with one of my friends that I grew up with, and they did this, and then we can kind of talk in more detail as to how they leveraged it. They leveraged an ADU over a 30-year period in some magnificent ways. And the first thing that happened was that my friend's grandparents were getting to the point that they couldn't care for themselves anymore in their own home. And so the family said, well, what can we do? We can't put them into a retirement center. We don't have the money to do that. So what they did is his grandparents sold their house and financed building an apartment that was attached to his home. And his parents then took care of his grandparents for probably about 8 years, through that part of life, which basically meant that they didn't need full-time caregiving. They just needed someone to assist them with things. They were around friends and family, and their years in their latter years were really good years, and it made it very great for the family. They passed on, but the apartment remained. Their youngest daughter, my friend's older sister, or younger sister, I guess, got married and couldn't afford to buy a house. And so the parent says, well, why don't you move into the apartment, pay us some rent for that, a fair rent. And the parents took part of that money that they were paying in rent and they put it into a savings account. And they said to their daughter and their new son-in-law, said, you save some money as much as you can while you're living here. When you get ready and find a house, we'll match what you've saved off of what they were currently saving from the rent. So literally, that doubled what they had for a down payment to purchase a home. And they were in finding a home in about a 2-year period. They were able to find a home and move out and have that home. So it benefited their daughter at that point. They then just rented it to people around who came in, and they were taking the money and putting it into their retirement planning accounts. And they did that for probably 15 or more years, where they just rented it out and had that income. They went on a mission, and so they rented out 2 areas, and they had that taken care of. They came back, and when they came back, they decided, geez, we don't have a family that needs this big house. They were living in about a 3,000 square foot home. Let's move into the apartment, we'll downsize, and we'll rent the house out. And so they rented the main house out for quite a bit more than they could the apartment, while they still stayed their same neighborhood, their same friends, the same people that they went to their religious association with. Everything remained the same. And now they're in their mid-80s, and one of their family members has moved their family back into the main house and is acting as the caregiver for them.
Wow.
When they pass away, the property will go to the family with the value that's in there. So over that 20 to 30 year period, this has probably been worth well over $750,000 worth of not only income generation, but savings and caring for family and doing so many things. That's what's so powerful about this.
Thank you for sharing that story. There's 3 things that I pulled out of that story that I want to point out for our listeners.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, you shared that they built that apartment with the ability to keep their parents close by and take care of them, right?
That is correct.
A big concern for folks moving into retirement is, how can we not only plan for our own long-term care expenses, but they also have aging parents that they want to be able to be around them and take care of them as well. So
yes, that is correct.
This type of approach in your friend's family circumstance, they were able to take care of their mom and dad,
right,
keep them close. And then in their older age, they were able to have some of their family stay close by and take care of them. So
and they were able to assist their children too.
Right. And that's the second one I wanted to mention was, so the first one was approaching long-term care or aging in place from a different perspective, leveraging your home in a way that you maintain your privacy in your living space.
That is correct.
The second one that I heard is you're able to be a parent in a unique way, right? So be able to have a separate living space that if you have a child that needs a little bit of help, needs a little bit of a kickstart.
Everyone goes through challenges in their lives at times. That's correct.
Right. Creating a space where your children are close by, but they're allowed to have some sort of independence. You'd shared a great example about a teaching moment towards some savings. So you're encouraging your children to save towards a down payment on their own home while still paying you rent to be there.
Right.
And then the third thing that I heard was what we all want in retirement was another income source.
That is correct.
So you'd mentioned first that they rented out that apartment, and then they went on a service mission, rented out both the home and the apartment.
Right.
And then in their later years, lived in the smaller apartment and then rented out the main home. So creating a space, again, where income is flexible. It's not always black and white and just relying on income from your pension and your Social Security, but it's the second line or third line of income when you need it.
But on top of income, consider the savings. If you were to look at what an assisted living center averages in the state of Utah, it's anywhere between $3,000 to $7,000 a month to go into an assisted living center. That is a huge expense.
Right. Absolutely. Because it's an asset that you've already paid for.
Right.
And the additional expense, if you have family close by, they're having somewhere to live.
Right.
And they're helping.
And what's really interesting is that, some families may go, I would love to have my parents here, but I don't know how I can take care of them because I work a full-time job. There are significant amount of resources to have outside services come in and help take care, to get your parents up and going in the morning, to help take care of their hygienic needs, to help them with food planning, to help them in taking them to places. So there's many resources that can be there that are inexpensive or much less expensive than going into assisted living.
So I love those 3 things.
Yep.
That's probably the highlight of our conversation today is the flexibility of using your real estate, either adding on to it through another building or improving your current building by putting a basement apartment in there. So I love those 3 points that we're able to point out there.
Great. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share those.
So on top of that, as our listeners are thinking, this is new to them. It might be new to them.
Yeah.
It might not. As they're starting to think through, is this a good fit for them? We talked about goal-centered planning as this is a goal-centered tool. Mm-hmm. And they start to work with their advisor or have conversations with their spouse. Do you know any resources to start pointing them in the right direction to understanding how this might fit in their city,
Well, certainly, I think you can go to a resource like me that can help you understand that, but you can start looking up a lot of this stuff on your own. One of the very first things you would want to do would be to contact your city planning commission or the planning manager. And if you go to your city's website, just look under the zoning and planning, you'll find who the planning department is and who manages that. Give them a call and ask them what is the city's current regulations around accessory dwelling units. And they'll happily tell you what's going on. And most of the cities have adopted some type of an ordinance. If not, they're debating it at this point and adding it because it is such a major issue in the state for housing. And it is one of many solutions that the cities are having to wrestle with to figure out how to create affordable housing, more housing, and a way to take care of their population needs.
Right. So obviously where they live, it's going to be able to determine whether or not they can do that or not and what the restrictions are.
Right. And what I would say is if they call up now and find out that their city does not have that, that doesn't mean that within the year or a year and a half that they won't. I'll give you a great example. In places where ADUs have taken off in California and Oregon, they are basically rapidly changing those yearly, what's going on with them. So even though it may not be something that's available in your community today, a year from now it might be. And it could take you a year just to kind of plan what you want to do to put that together, because you have to, you literally are building a home, okay? And most homes that you are building take a while to plan, to prepare all of the documentation that you'll need to get a building permit from the city, to get it turned in, to get it financed and get all that. It could take you 6 months to get through that process. So just because the city doesn't have it today doesn't mean you can't start doing the planning.
Because most likely it will come in the future.
That is correct.
Right. So it sounds like you're pretty, based off of your individual experience, you'd mentioned you went down to the city planning, asking about whether or not you could finish a basement.
Yeah.
It sounded like it was a new ordinance at the time there in your city in Utah. And was that kind of the genesis of you starting I Live in a Bank?
Yes, it absolutely was. Because what I recognized is, frankly, I was scared. I was really, really frightened for my future because I thought, oh my gosh, if we have any type of just a minor bump in the road, we could be in trouble very quickly, and we might lose our biggest asset, our home. You don't have to go a long time with being unemployed and at about 60 years old. If you don't have enough side income that you planned for and you're still paying for a house, in 3 months, you're in trouble and you might be out of your house. And then you not only lost your house, but you've lost all of the equity that you put in that house. So I was very frightened. Mm-hmm. When I found that I could create essentially a second space that would literally pay my monthly mortgage, I can't tell you the relief that I felt, because I figured if I got my mortgage taken care of, my housing, everything else, I can figure out how to make all of the rest happen.
Right. And you've shared with me your situation with your home.
That is correct.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
I'd be happy to tell you, because
really got that relief of maybe an ADU even paying your primary mortgage?
Yeah, I was hoping that it would be something that would offset my expense. So I started going through the whole scenario of what I would do. And I told you a little bit earlier that I ended up not wanting to do something in my basement, but doing something external. And that was replacing my old garage that I knew I would have to replace anyway, and getting a brand new 2-car garage with an apartment above it. And then I started, okay, well, how am I going to finance this? And I went and looked for a second mortgage. And I could have gotten a second mortgage because of the equity I had in the house, but I would have been paying my primary loan and a second mortgage, which would have been about $1,600 a month to me to do, about $1,100 and about $500 for the second mortgage to do that. I said, well, if I were to refinance my house and put it all into a new 30-year mortgage, we were at 22 years on this primary mortgage, what would my payments be? And for me to take enough out of my equity to build the building and refinance at 30 years, my payments still remained at $1,100 a month. Okay, even though I pulled out a significant change of equity. And the markets in the Bountiful area where I live right now, for the single bedroom apartment, which in our case is about 800 square feet, it's a very nice apartment, we can get about $1,200 a month out of it. So in effect, I've created myself a mortgage-free environment with not really spending any more than maybe, I think we spent about $1,500 to get through the loan process of getting it financed and everything else. That's about my out-of-pocket expense to get my mortgage taken care of for the rest of my life.
Incredible. So if someone like our listeners still has 10 years left until they retire, they're worried about preparing for retirement, and the idea of having this accessory dwelling unit or leveraging the real estate before they retire, actually, from what you're sharing with me, that gives them an opportunity to not have a mortgage payment or have the rental pay for their mortgage all the way up until they retire.
That is correct.
And beyond.
Now, our plan personally with my wife and I is that because we're essentially replacing what we're doing in our mortgage payment right now, is we're going to take part of that and actually pay our mortgage down quicker and put some of it into a retirement plan. So we're building a retirement plan and we're shrinking our debt very quickly, but we haven't changed anything in our monthly expense.
That's powerful.
Yes. Huge.
Extremely powerful.
Huge.
Right.
That's why I got so excited about this, because I know that I'm not the only one who's in my age bracket, that 45 to 65 years old, who is looking at, oh my gosh, I am not prepared, and how can I do this? And one of the biggest tools that they have is their home and their property. Where else in Utah could you essentially find an income generating property that would give you about $1,000 a month for under $100,000 as an investment?
Tough to find.
Very tough.
Right. You find that most commonly in real estate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can find a home that you could purchase and want to rent out for under $250,000.
Right. That's where the leveraging of your own asset is so valuable, because it's right there.
Yes.
Right. You're not purchasing a whole nother plot of land.
Yes.
You're just adding on to the existing one.
That is correct.
So through your process of going down to City Hall and learning this as a new ordinance and thinking of it for yourself and running the numbers for yourself, I'm guessing that you've had a lot of ahas in the meantime.
Oh, yes.
And based off of that experience, you started this company called I Live in a Bank.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that. That's how I kind of came to know so much about this, is from you sharing that. Yeah. So what is I Live in a Bank? What do you do as a company? How do you educate people and move them through and beyond that experience?
Well, Devin, I really, really appreciate you asking that. And I came up with the term I Live in a Bank because I didn't really want to say, oh, my ADU, because everybody looked back, what are you doing? Because I got excited because I realized my home literally is a bank that can start paying me dividends. And that's why I came up with the name. And what I recognized is that an ADU is really a tool. It's not the end goal. It's a tool that you are using to help you manage your future, your finances, and your family. And so as a company, that's really what we focus on, is how we can help you create a long-term plan using an accessory dwelling unit as a tool to assist you with your family, your future, and your finances. And in doing that, what I do is I assemble a team of people, much like yourself, to say, okay, what would you like to accomplish and what are the things that you're worried about over the next 30 years in your family situation and in your financial situation, and so that you could kind of work through that. And that means one of the things that I really get concerned about is many people who would put a rental property on their house have never been a landlord before.
And can I stop you for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's a big concern.
Yes.
As a retirement consultant, as I meet with families and they bring up the idea that they want to get into real estate once they retire, maybe taking a lump sum of their pension or their 401k and putting it into real estate, buying a few rental properties, that's absolutely an option.
It is.
However, my direction is usually, well, if you haven't ever been a landlord before, it's maybe not the best time to step into that role.
Yes.
Because it's not as easy as a lot of folks think.
That is
collecting
correct.
rent, doing maintenance, and all of that.
It's
so that's
great.
a big concern for folks.
It's true. It's great to think that, that income's coming in monthly. But when somebody comes to you and says, my car broke down and I can't make a payment for my rent, can you give me a couple of weeks? Then your heartstrings starts to pull for them. You give them a couple of weeks, and then it ends up being a month, and then it ends up being 2 months. And now all at once you're 3 months without getting paid. And that is tough for people who don't know how to manage a rental.
So difficult.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do with anybody I work with putting in an accessory dwelling unit is my company actually pays for the first year of property management so that you can have a property manager who will actually work you through that process of being a landlord and take care of all of those headaches for you. And the two first biggest headaches are marketing your property so that you can get potential rentals who are going to be there, and then screening the rental applicants to ensure they will be a good applicant, who's got a good payment history and a good job and things that will take care of that. And then the third thing that they provide is they provide a great contract or lease that the tenant knows exactly what their responsibilities are. And then they provide prompt management of that contract so that when a tenant becomes in default, it's dealt with immediately. And therefore, if there is a problem, that's dealt with and the transition happens very quickly so that your money flow is not interrupted.
Right. As I think through for our listeners what some of the objections might be about adding an accessory dwelling unit to their basement or to the side or the back of their house, I think of the hassle, right? Number one is obviously maintaining your own privacy, your own space, right? And I think that happens by having a separate living space, but also the hassle. Is it worth the time? Is it worth the effort? And having a property manager that takes care of that, I feel should take a large burden off their shoulders.
It really is a big difference because another thing you need to consider is whoever is basically there is your neighbor. A very close neighbor, and you will have a relationship with them. And what a property manager has is it kind of puts up that wall that we can have a relationship, but when it comes to the apartment, the rent, and things that are going on, you get to talk to the property management company because I'm under contract with them, and so they deal with that. As you get older, you may want to travel more. Well, you don't want to get a call while you're in the middle of a vacation saying, the sink is leaking in the bathroom and I need to have it fixed. Right. And they're expecting you to come fix that. That goes to the property manager. The property manager contacts you and says, we've got a reserve fund to take care of that. I'll get it taken care of in the morning. You go on with your vacation. You don't worry about it. And what little expense that you pay for that property management is huge in the personal relief and ability to enjoy your life as opposed to being tied to managing that property.
Okay. So one of the benefits of working with I Live in a Bank is helping them connect them to a property manager. So you mentioned a team. So assembling a team of a financial advisor that kind of helps them walk them through the goal-based solution that they're really looking for. Do you help them to see what type of design might work for their house?
Absolutely. I actually have homes that are pre-designed, but we can do a custom design. And you talked a little bit about privacy. How you place the ADU, if it's an external one, and just a few simple little tricks that you do in some of your landscaping really creates two separate private places and can create a great amount of privacy in how you live, which is really, really important. You still want to have your own backyard.
Absolutely.
And you'd like them to have their backyard, but you'd like it to know this is mine and that's yours. And then just some strategically placed bushes and trees and short fences make a huge difference in the privacy of how that works. Even simple things like a breezeway roof between the two buildings that has a partition in it that is semi-visible so that it gives a private entrance, but now you've got a covered patio that was paid for by putting in your ADU.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's great things to come with that.
Yeah, I love that kind of insight. Obviously, you live and breathe ADUs and helping people through this. And so if someone's thinking, privacy, I wouldn't even know where to start to make that space valuable and flow. I'm sure that's something that you kind of see as you look at a plot plan, different house plans, and stuff like that.
Something else that we bring along on the team is that when you create an income generating property, you have now created a business. You have a business because you've got money that's now coming into you as a business. And there are a lot of people that out there who have never actually owned or operated a business. They've worked great jobs and had great careers and they've been employees, of those places. But there are some huge benefits of being a business in that you now can have some tax advantages, but you have no idea what those are and you don't really know how to account for it. So we bring in a partner to help advise on how to set up and run this as a business so that when it comes time for you to take care of your taxes, you're not in that big sweat. Oh, am I going to get in trouble? What's going to happen with this? What can I claim as income? What can I claim as expenses? That is a huge relief that you need to also have guide you through this.
Absolutely. And on the retirement finance side, there's quite a few benefits, tax benefits from having those additional write-offs.
Yeah.
So, working with a CPA, it sounds like your team kind of provides some insight and strategy on that. It can be very powerful from the tax side, not just the generating income side.
Because taxes can still be a major issue in retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. Reducing taxes is and should be the number one goal of most retirees.
Right.
Especially with our government heading the way it is, with the potentiality of increased tax rates. And
having a business gives you a way of being able to get some great tax advantages and tax benefits because your expenses they take right off of what's coming in before you're taxed. You're only taxed on what that profitability is. You and I, when we have a job, we get taxed on the entire amount, which is a big difference.
Absolutely. So I love some of these resources that you're sharing because in the minds of our listeners, absolutely they want to create an asset that's flexible that they can use for retirement. They want to potentially create more income using their current assets with, quite bluntly, much better the return that they could probably get you putting those same dollars to work in the market. The biggest thing that I see is just education. That's why I kind of kept asking, where do they go? Do they talk to their city? Do they talk to this? Do you have any resources on your website?
Oh, absolutely. If you go to ilivinabank.com, what I've really tried to do with that website is make it an educational website where there are frequently asked questions about these very certain things. And if there's not an answer to that, email in the question and I will put the answer and we'll post it up there for them to have that. Because there's just a ton of questions out there that I haven't answered at this point. We haven't even touched on some of the things that this could be used to help solve a problem with parents who have basically aged to the point that they can't live in their house anymore because they are in a wheelchair or a walker, yet they refuse to leave their home because that's where their 30-year friends and neighbors and everything is. And I can't blame them. And yet they will literally be miserable in their physical environment to remain happy in their emotional environment. And if you were to just consider that, well, what if we were to build a new ADU in their backyard that they could live in that is already accessible for wheelchairs and walkers and being able to take care of, move them into that, they're still with their neighbors and friends, clear the house out and rent the house out and offset their retirement. What a huge benefit that could be. And then also that asset, when it comes to the end, is now can be transferred over to the family as an income generating asset.
Right. And that last point I love because investing in improving your property, it's very different than quote unquote investing in, I say that those quotes are very loose, just so you know, very sarcastic. Investing in a long-term home stay, because obviously those dollars that go into the nursing home or the long-term care facility are gone month after month as you spend them. And it is a big,
significant chunk.
However, building an additional building on your home or building a space in your basement, it's adding value to an asset that is going to remain within your estate or within your family and be passed on to the next generation.
That is correct.
Whether that's additional income producing asset that the children can use, or whether that home or homes, in the case that you have two separate spaces, is sold at a higher value.
Yeah.
So there's so many applicable principles in there that
Yeah.
are building towards a bigger and better bright and
Yeah,
brighter
absolutely.
retirement.
So my advice is, this isn't for everybody, but it certainly is worth considering as an option to look at, because over the next little while for me at 60 years old, I know I got major changes coming up in my life, financially, physically, emotionally, and I looked at this as being a huge tool in being able to allow me to really move through those challenges much more smoothly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Before we finish up our podcast today, and I do this with all my guests, so bear with me.
That's okay.
I would love to ask you as a person, as an individual, what makes Brooks Gibbs feel alive? I love this question because we get some great answers, but what makes you feel alive? And then how do you stay relevant in your own life, in your own family, in your own community?
I would have answered that question much differently 10 years ago than I do now, because the gift of aging is perspective. And while I'd say it was very similar, what I've really come to realize is that my life will come to an end, and I will leave all of the physical things that I've done in this life behind me. But what I will not leave behind is all of the things that I did to help others in their journey. And so through the last 20 years of my life, I've really tried to refocus and find what brings me the greatest joy is knowing that I'm making a difference in somebody else's life. And I went for basically 2 years kind of trying to figure out what to do after I got laid off my job. And I just naturally, the universe sort of brings things to you. It's brought this into my space, and it fits so many of what I want to do. I'm able to accomplish some of the financial goals that I want for myself, but more importantly, I'm able to give an opportunity and solution to people who truly feel lost. And it can make a huge difference for them and their family over the next 20 years. And that is more valuable than any paycheck I'll ever get.
I can feel that as we sit here and have this conversation. I can feel your aliveness as you talk about making a difference in folks' lives.
Yeah.
That's a worry for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Am I going to run out of money? How do I pay for retirement? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my home?
I have this little mantra that I come up for myself that I'd like to share with your listeners if you're there.
Love to.
What I realized in thinking about it is that I am not my circumstance. My circumstance is my teacher. It's here to teach me something. Who I am is my next choice. So what do I choose to be? And so for anybody out there who's really struggling in whatever way, capacity, whether it's in their finances or with their family or a job or, your circumstances may really be difficult, but they're only there to give you the opportunity to educate you what's not working in your life and give you the opportunity to make a new choice.
Wow.
And you are your next choice. That's who you are. Your circumstances are now behind you. What you choose to be and how you choose to deal with them defines who you are.
Love that, Brooks. Your circumstances are your teacher. You choose who you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Brooks, thank you again for joining us today on Brighter Retirement Radio. So glad to have you. We'll put in the show notes a link to I Live in a Bank and some additional resources there so they can reach out to you if they have any further questions. But thank you so much. And I hope to continue our conversation another time.
Oh, I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to that. And to all of you out there, it's been a pleasure working with this young man. I got to tell you, Devin has one of those lights that he generally cares about people that he works with. It isn't about just your finances. It's about you. And that's really why I was excited to do this show, because you're sharing things that you really care about who you work with. So kudos to you.
Absolutely appreciate that. Unashamed.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you on the next episode.